Hi, long range hunting. What you are about to see is extremely graphic. Honestly, I don't know why I have to say that because you're hunters. This is part of hunting. If you can't stand blood, guts, brains, etc., meat, how do you hunt? Viewer discretion is advised. If you're a hunter, I really advise that you should watch this video so you know what you're doing and what happens in real life when you shoot an animal. All of these shots were taken by highly skilled marksmen and hunters. Do not, I repeat, do not try this at home. Unless you have property in the backyard where you can hunt right outside your house, then heck, go for it. Good on you. Side note, you might want to go outside. If your wife is making dinner for you or breakfast and she's not paying attention and you shoot a deer from your table inside the house, that does not go over well. Just saying, that might get you killed. Enjoy the videos. Hi, long range hunting. Today we're going to be continuing our terminal ballistics series of real world results. Please bear with me. I've been very sick for the last week. I'm just now being able to get to talk and I'm trying to knock this out. I've been wanting to do this video for quite a while. Got some new editing software which makes it a lot better. So we're going to try to crush through this. Just bear with me with any coughing or losing my voice. Now, what is a high shoulder shot? Now, a high shoulder shot is a shot that we take. It's one of the CNS shots, which stands for central nervous system. It's where if you hit that and you get your proper performance, what's going to happen is that animal is going to drop dead. It's cutting all signals to the brain and it's shutting down that entire system, and that animal is just going to drop on the spot.
Dumped him.
Smoked him, dude.
Yeah. Dump.
One of the most quick and effective ways to put down an animal ethically. Now, this is a favorite of long-range hunters, cullers, etc., because it just, again, it anchors them. You don't have to worry about tracking, and it's a very quick and effective way to put them down. Now, as always, even though I'm sick, I still took the time to make sure you guys had some of my beautiful artwork. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad diagrams out there. There's also a lot of bad information, so people get confused. Now, a high shoulder shot is this upper part of the blade, and if you look at the anatomy here, you have your spine running through here, you have your lungs here, you have your heart here, and contrary to popular belief, what happens is this leg bone goes up, it goes forward, and then it comes back. And so people believe a lot of times it just comes straight up just because when they pull the legs off, they just see it straight. There is connective tissue through here, muscle, etc. And so the muscle is what goes in between there and holds that. Now, if you want to archery or rifle, shoot right in here in this V, it's a very good shot. You're not going to impact bone because the bone goes forward. Why a lot of people don't do that is they're concerned about meat damage, and just behind the leg, you're only impacting the rib meat versus impacting front leg meat. That's a personal choice, but whatever you want to do. Now, depending on the animal, it's going to change. Some animals' vitals are shifted slightly forward, some are shifted slightly back. So you need to understand each animal and the anatomy and go from there. But if you actually look at most animals, you can see the outline of where that shoulder goes and where it ends up. So make sure you're studying your animals. That's just part of being a hunter. Now let's dive into how it works. So what's happening is when you impact here, you have your spinal cord. Now your spinal cord goes into the neck, and some people call it the kill switch. I don't really call it that, but there is a spot where the brain stem, that's where your signals to the brain, it comes back, and right around here, what happens is there's a bunch of nerves, etc., that send signals throughout the body. So brain tells it, it goes through the brain stem out to here, and then it distributes everywhere else on what the brain wants you to do. If you want, move your arm, your leg, whatever. Humans have the same thing as far as those signals going through. And so what's happening when you hit this, if you hit that spinal column / where it meets the neck, and you have that kill switch, what's going to happen is it's going to blow through that. It's going to cut all signals to the brain and drop it. A lot of misinformation out there about this because people think that you have to hit that directly in order for it to work. With bad bullets, yes, you do. But it's not actually true for most bullets. Now, it actually drops down quite a bit. A lot of people don't realize that. As far as the neck, it goes more through the center. And then it kind of comes up and goes to the back. It's not as cut and dry as some people think. There's a lot of bad diagrams and stuff out there, a lot of misinformation, but there's two ways you're going to do this high shoulder shot. One, you're going to hit this upper part of the blade, which you're either going to impact the spine in the quote-unquote kill switch, or you're going to hit this lower part. Now, if you hit this upper part, what's going to happen is that projectile is going to go through, it's going to break one or both shoulders. It's going to go through, it's going to hit that spine, it's going to blow through there. All signals of the brain are cut. The lungs are going to be punctured. So it's a devastating shot. It's going to cause a lot of damage as far as internals, not so much on the meat. We'll get to that in a second. If you're going for up here, again, you're getting it done. Now, here on the lower part is where most people run into problems. It's still as lethal of a shot. However, you have to have good bullet performance. Now, what do I mean by that? If you hit this lower part of the leg, it's going to go through the lungs. However, without a good enough energy transfer from bullet performance, you're not going to shut down that CNS. So effectively, you just hit bone and did a lung shot. So you're going to get a collapsed lung. So what we're dealing with there is pneumothorax, which is where the lungs collapse. Now, this little diagram here, this beauty is what we're looking at. So this side is a normal lung. When you get a puncture wound, whether it's a bullet, an arrow, etc., what's going to happen is that lung now has a hole. Now, as air is expanded out, that air is filling the void between the lungs and the chest wall. Now, that lung cannot expand anymore because it's meeting that air. So it's going to go down again as it breathes out more, and it's slowly getting less and less until that lung fully collapses. So that's what you're doing with that. It's not as fast of a kill as a CNS shot, but that's what's going to happen here. Now, that's with bad bullet performance. So if you don't get a good energy transfer, you don't get good expansion. This is stuff I've seen with bullets like hammers, Badland Precision, monolithics mainly, Barnes. I have seen it with some like Corlock. I've seen a couple Corlocks do this, or it didn't drop it, and some of the more hard constructed projectiles out there. But if you have a good projectile that's going to transfer good energy, let's say you hit right here. Well, guess what? That energy transfer is going to be sufficient enough to where it's going to disrupt and mess up the kill switch sufficient enough that it's going to shut down the CNS. Now, if you are high enough velocity to achieve hydraulic shock, what's going to happen is that's actually going to break the spine, and it's going to obliterate everything inside of here. So, if you have good bullet performance, like bullets that we use for long range, ELD match, Berger hybrids, Sierra TMKs, etc., A-tips, then this is still a good shot. If you're going for the lower or the higher, you're good to go. If you're aiming here, you hit it, great. You go low, guess what? It's a lung shot. If you're off this way, you're off wind, whatever, it's a neck shot, another CNS shot. If you go back this way, it's high lungs, and guess what? With a large enough temporary wound cavity, it can still break the spine and shut down the CNS. Now, you don't want to go too far back, because a spine shot without shutting down the CNS and that signals to the brain, is just going to basically paralyze it until it bleeds out. All right, let's move on to bones and meat damage. Now, these are one of the biggest topics when it comes to different animals, especially with high shoulder shots. I hear all the time people saying dumb stuff like, oh, well, you know, white-tailed deer's nothing, but, you know, elk is super tough and it's got these giant, enormous bones and it's a completely different thing and it just sucks up bullets. No. Elk are super easy to kill. Quit using crappy bullets and you'll see that. You know, that's one of the things I run into. People overestimate animals, and so they get projectiles that are not what they need. They're expecting to shoot something armored, and so those projectiles just blow through without really expanding because they overestimated what they need. Now, just like always, I stick to facts and provable stuff. So I am going to show you a couple things. These are actual shoulders. This one, thank you to my friends at Best of the West, Arizona, for sending me this one so I could do this video. This one is from an elk. This is from my buck that I shot in November. So we have the shoulders from each one to compare. There's not a lot of difference. People, I don't understand it. Most of them don't do their own butchering. They don't actually look at the shoulders. They don't mess with them. They just see the size of the leg difference and they're like, oh, well, that must be huge. Well, is this longer and wider? Yes. The depth of penetration difference? Not a whole heck of a lot more. We're not talking astronomical amounts here. We're talking about 1/8 of an inch difference. I mean, that's just what it is. These bones are not super thick. I mean, if you get down into here, yeah, you're dealing with a thicker piece of bone, but I mean, even then, the difference is 1/2 an inch between these two. So it's not something drastic. And again, you're not aiming for this, so it really isn't a problem, but I've blown through this no issue. And, you know, same thing with ribs. So let's look at whitetail ribs. This is a video from when I got my doe.
Hey guys, real quick, I wanted to show you something. I did a high shoulder shot on this, 513 yards, 6 Creedmoor, 110 A-tip. But something I want to show you guys is, and part of this is just from the cutting, but I'm cutting off this front shoulder. I wanted to show you guys this, but people claim there's this crazy amount of meat damage and there's a crazy amount of meat on these front shoulders. There's really not. So if you look, see the front shoulder, not a whole lot there. Especially look at my hand, especially if you look at that rear leg, which I'll show you in a second. But if you look inside here, that is where the bullet hit. You can see up here, those are pieces of the bone from it. It hit, but there's no real damage to the leg. All that meat, there'll be a slight little bit of trimming and it'll be fine, but I mean, there's nothing really drastic done to it that's going to cause a lot of meat loss. But you can see the bullet did a fantastic job. It dropped it dead on the spot. Other side is just a small hole. So this is when it's all cut open, so it's not normally as bad as that. But it went through here, caught the spine, which the top of the high shoulder will do that. But again, this was not as large as it is now. I just cut that open so you can see it. So it appears much worse than it actually is, but I mean, you're look at that thin little piece of meat. You're not losing a lot. You saw the shoulder. None of this, it's not spiraling through the rest of the body like people claim. There's a located part right there. Hey guys, now I'm going to show you the chest cavity. You can see there is just chunks of stuff. It's just goo that you can just squeeze through your fingers. Match bullets do a nasty job inside, but it's just utterly destroyed in there. So you can see it's just putty. This is what you do and what you see when you get hydraulic shock. All right, so another part, rib thickness. So we have, as I talked about, all that empty space in there. But if you look, this is what we're dealing with the thickness of the ribs. I mean, that's my finger or less. So realistically, when you squeeze down on it, you're looking around a 1/4 inch or so. Maybe a little bit thicker, 3/8, but if we remove the meat, it's a very, very thin bone there. There's not a lot of whitetail.
Now, as you can see, there's a lot of good damage in there, but the ribs especially, you can see that it's not that thick. A lot of people don't understand, and this picture will show you that, you know, those ribs, they're not perfectly circular. So that's not a contributing factor. They're actually a lot thinner than what most people see, but most people don't actually mess with the bones. They're just, you know, taking it to the butcher, or they leave the ribs there. And so, but you can see from that picture, or it's broken from that projectile going through, it's not circular. It's actually a little bit more wide than anything. And the difference you're going to run into, just like this, between like elk and deer, is the rib is going to be longer and it's going to be wider. However, that is irrelevant. If you take a sheet, a 4x4 sheet of mild steel that's 1/4 inch thick, and you shoot through it, and then you take a 10 inch by 10 inch 1/4 inch thick and shoot through it, guess what? It's the exact same thing. It's a 1/4 inch of steel that it's got to go through that projectile. So there's not a whole heck of a lot difference between the shoulders of a deer and an elk. And then even the ribs, if you look at these ribs, that's from an elk. You can see that once everything's removed, it's not as big as you'd think. The difference in depth of penetration required between an elk and a white-tailed deer is only 6 inches. We're talking an inch difference of depth of penetration to the vitals, and an elk's vitals are only 5 inches deeper than a white-tailed deer. So there's not a whole lot of difference. You can see there's a major gap in between those ribs too. That's why I do my ballistic gel with and without bones, because believe it or not, you can shoot through an animal without ever hitting a bone with a broadside shot. But those ribs between a white-tailed deer and an elk are not significantly more thick in the depth of penetration. And so bones and everything, you're not looking at a lot. Even if you go through the shoulder and you go through the ribs, it's nothing crazy. You can see the spines is just like this. The elk's is bigger. You have it longer going up, longer to the side, but the depth of penetration, again, isn't much different. So your bullet's going to do what it needs to do. That's not an issue. As long as you don't have the impact velocity too high for that particular projectile, you're not going to have a problem. Now let's talk about bullets and impact velocity. This is something I see a lot of. Guys will hear about high shoulder shots and they say, oh, I want to do that. That's cool. And they don't actually understand. You know, I talked about bad graphs and stuff with anatomy. That's one issue. Guys not understanding bullets. And what will happen is they'll say, oh, well, I used an ELD match. I used a Burger hybrid, you know, etc. And it failed. I go, what do you mean it failed? Well, I did a high shoulder shot. Well, where'd you hit it at? How fast, you know, etc. And they'll, oh, well, you know, I shot it out of my, 300 at, 3,000 feet per second at, 50 yards. I'm like, okay, well, for that bullet construction and that impact velocity and impact resistance, it's going entirely too fast. So you got to understand bullets limitations. My general rule of thumb I teach is 2,400 feet per second. For the good match bullets like A-tips, ELD match, Burger hybrids, etc., AMAXs, TMKs, etc., bullets like that that have thinner jackets, I'm going to recommend, just that's a general rule of thumb, it'll work for you, 2,400 feet per second and faster, avoid high shoulder. Under 2,400 feet per second, high shoulder all day long. The reason I do this is that's going to give you good performance. Now, can you go higher than that? Yes, but you got to know what you're doing. So it's kind of one of those things you really got to study. It's not something I'm going to advertise everybody go do. I did ballistic gel testing and did hide, meat, and shoulders, and did that up to 2950. The way you can get higher with that is, one, going with a higher sectional density and longer projectile, because that bullet, the longer it is, the more it's going to expand. And the more dense it is, the easier it's going to hold up to those types of shots. But the main thing is just going down in diameter. You have less surface contact with, so let's say this is my 30 cal. When it impacts, we're having this much surface area, so you're going to get a lot more expansion. With you having less surface contact, it's going to allow you to blow through a lot more, especially when you're going with like the A-tips, like a 110 or a 108 ELD match, where you're getting those heavier caliber bullets going at a good velocity. So going with something smaller, you can get away with a higher impact velocity. Same thing even with 30 cals. If you're running the really heavy 30 cals, you're not going to have a problem at a little bit higher velocities than what you're seeing with just, normal shots. But quite honestly, the 2400 is a great rule, whether you have the bullet to go above that or not. Honestly, at those higher velocities behind the shoulder or in that fatal V is going to do everything you need to. It's going to destroy the vitals. You're going to be at that hydraulic shock level, so it's just going to obliterate everything with good bullet performance. So it's not something I worry about. Now, if you get into bullets with a harder construction, with thicker jackets that are made for a lot of depth of penetration where they need to hold together a lot more, then you can go higher. Depending on the bullet, how it's going to work and perform, you're going to get higher than what you can with something like a match bullet. So with general hunting bullets, lead core that are a lot thicker jacketed, you can go up. If you're talking like the ELDX, you can go up. SSTs in them, I'd say 2700 is what I would say the peak of that is. Mainly 2600 feet per second is what I would limit that. Monolithics, if you choose to use those, that's where you run into a lot of problems because they don't transfer as much potential energy. They don't perform as well, but you can do it a lot higher. And honestly, if you're going to use a monolithic, you might want to use high shoulder shots just to add that little bit of impact resistance and aid you in good terminal performance. In conclusion, it's a good shot. Don't believe all the bad information out there that, they're super thick bones, etc. You can't do it with this. You have to hit that kill switch. Get a good bullet, practice, know your anatomy, and it'll get the job done. Everybody be safe out there. Happy hunting.
Not that hard, people.
Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notification bell so you won't miss out on any future video. And happy hunting.